Welcome back, everybody, to another day of the Twits. I'm ready. Got my roly-poly bird hat on and I'm ready to go. So let's see what chapters we've done so far. We have done Hairy Faces, we've done Twits, we've done Dirty Beards, we've done Mr. Twit, we've done 5, the Glass Eye, we've done 6, the Frog, we've done 7, Wormy Spaghetti, and we have done 8, the funny walking stick. Today we are doing number 9, 10 and 11. So we're doing 3 chapters today. So let's get started. So Mrs. Twit has the shrinks. As soon as Mrs. Twit sat down, Mr. Twit pointed at her and shouted, "Oh, there you are, you're sitting in your old chair, and you've shrunk so much your feet aren't even touching the ground." Mrs. Twit looked down at her feet, and by golly, the man was right. Her feet were not touching the ground. Mr. Twit, you see, had been very clever with the chair, as he'd been with the walking stick. Every night when he'd gone downstairs, he'd stuck a little bit of extra on the stick. He had done the same on the 4 legs of Mrs. Twit's chair. So Mr. Twit has really thought about this. He's not just done it on a walking stick. He's done it on her chair as well, so when she sits down, her legs will dangle. Very clever. "Oh, just look at you sitting there in the same old chair," he cried, "and you've shrunk so much your feet are dangling in the air." Mrs. Twit went quite white with fear. "You've got the shrinks," cried Mr. Twit, pointing his finger at her like a pistol. "You've got them badly. You've got the most terrible case of the shrinks I've ever seen." Mrs. Twit became so frightened she began to drivel. But Mr. Twit, still remembering the worms and his spaghetti, didn't feel sorry for her at all. I suppose you know what happens to you when you get the shrinks," he said. "What?" gasped Mrs. Twit. "What happens?" "Your head shrinks into your neck, and your neck shrinks into your body, and your body shrinks into your legs, and your legs shrink into your feet, and then there's nothing left except for a pair of shoes and a bundle of old clothes." "Oh, I can't bear it," cried Mrs. Twit. "It's a terrible disease," said Mr. Twit, "the worst in the world." "Oh, how long have I got?" cried Mrs. Twit. "How long before I finish up as a bundle of old clothes and a pair of shoes?" Mr. Twit put on a very solemn face. "At the rate you're going," he said, shaking his head sadly, "I'd say not more than 10 or 11 days. "Oh, but isn't there anything we can do?" cried Mrs. Twit. "There's only one cure for the shrinks," said Mr. Twit. "Tell me," she cried. "Oh, tell me quickly." "We'll have to hurry," said Mr. Twit. "I'm ready. I'll hurry. I'll do anything you say," cried Mrs. Twit. "Oh, you won't last long if you don't," said Mr. Twit, giving her another grisly grin. "What must I do?" cried Mrs. Twit, clutching her cheeks. "You've got to be stretched," said Mr. Twit. "So I wonder how he's going to stretch her. Doesn't sound very nice." Mrs. Twit gets a stretching. Mr. Twit and Mrs. Twit led Mrs. Twit outdoors, where he had everything ready for the great stretching. He had 100 balloons and lots of strings. He had a gas cylinder for filling the balloons. He had fixed an iron ring into the ground. "Stand here," he said, pointing to the iron ring. Then he tied Mrs. Twit's ankles into the iron ring. When he was done, he began filling the balloons with gas. Each balloon was on a long string. When it was filled with gas, it pulled on the string, trying to go up and up. Mr. Twit tied the ends of the strings to the top of Mrs. Twit's body. He tied some around her neck, some around her arms, some around her wrist, and some even to her hair. Soon there were 50 coloured balloons floating in the air above Mrs. Twit's head. "Can you feel them stretching you?" asked Mr. Twit. I can, cried Mrs. Twits. "They're stretching me like mad." He put another 10 balloons. The upward pull became very strong. Mrs. Twit was quite helpless now. With her feet tied to the ground and her arms pulled upwards by the balloons, she was unable to move. She was a prisoner, and Mr. Twit had intended to go away and leave her like that for a couple of days and nights to teach her a lesson. In fact, he was just about to leave when Mrs. Twit opened her big mouth and said something silly. "Are you sure my feet are tied properly to the ground?" she gasped. "If those strings around my ankles break, it'll be goodbye for me." And that gave Mr. Twit a second nasty idea. So let's have a look. Well, you can see from the picture that if you have a look at the picture, what is Mr. Twit doing? He's got something in his hands, and Mrs. Twit was attached to here, but now her feet are no longer attached to the ground. So what do you think he's done? He is a very dastardly man, isn't he? Let's read the next chapter. It's called Mrs. Twit Goes Ballooning Up. "There's enough pull on here to take me to the moon," Mrs. Twit cried out. "Oh, take you to the moon?" exclaimed Mr. Twit. "Oh, what a ghastly thought. We wouldn't want anything like that to happen. Oh, dear me, no." "We certainly wouldn't," cried Mrs. Twit. "Put some more string around my ankles quickly. I want to feel absolutely safe." "Oh, very well, my angel," said Mr. Twit. And with a ghoulish grin on his lips, he knelt down at her feet. He took a knife from his pocket, and with one quick slash, he cut through the strings holding Mrs. Twit's ankle to the iron ring. Up she went like a rocket. "Help!" she screamed. "Save me!" But there was no saving her now. In a few seconds she was high up in the blue sky and climbing fast. Mr. Twit stood down below, looking up. "Oh, what a pretty sight," he said to himself. "How lovely those balloons look up in the sky. What a marvellous bit of luck for me. At last the old hag is lost and gone forever." So if we look back at this picture, so this picture is where Mr. Twit, he's a bit of an evil man, isn't he? He has cut the strings on Mrs. Twit's ankles so that she is not she's not attached to the ground. She's floating high up in the sky. So how do you think Mrs. Twit can get down? How do you think? What do you think Mrs. Twit can do to get down? Do you think she can do anything to get down? Do you think something else is going to help her get down? Well, if you read the story before, you'll know the answer. But try and use your imagination and think, how is she going to get down? Now, we know this is not the end of the story, because there's more to come. So we must guess that she must be able to get down, or something must happen that she gets down some way. What do you think it is? Maybe you could write a sentence or draw a picture of that, and I can't wait to see your drawings. I hope you enjoyed today's story, and see you tomorrow.